February 3rd, 2023, just before 9 p.m. in East Palestine, Ohio, the sirens start. A column of black smoke shoulders the sky, fat and unnatural. Police lights wash the streets blue. Phones buzz with alerts residents have never seen before. Evacuate now. Down by the track, Norfolk Southern train 32N has folded into itself. 38 cars scattered like broken toys. Flames lick at tank cars marked with placards for chemicals most people can't pronounce. 3 days later, crews will punch holes in 5 of those tanks and set the contents on fire, a controlled burn they'll call it, to prevent something worse. The plume will rise so high that weather satellites will capture it from space. Those images will be on every TV in America. But according to federal investigators, that dramatic burn never needed to happen, because this disaster, like most disasters, started long before the fire. The night everything changed. Train 32N was a beast. 149 cars stretching nearly 2 miles, hauling everything from frozen vegetables to industrial chemicals across the heartland. The crew had picked it up in Illinois, bound for Conway, Pennsylvania. But car number 23 had a problem. So here's something about trains you probably never thought about. Every rail car rides on roller bearings, a precisely machined set of metal cylinders about the size of your thumb, arranged in a circle. These bearings let multi-ton loads roll with less resistance than pushing a shopping cart. The L1 bearing on car 23, a covered hopper carrying plastic pellets, had been failing for at least 30 miles. We know this because modern railways track this fastidiously. Every 10 to 20 miles, trains pass wayside detectors that shoot infrared beams at wheel bearings, checking their temperature. At 7:37 p.m., the train passed through Sebring, Ohio. The bearing read normal, but something had already begun. Maybe a crack in the bearing cage, maybe contamination in the grease, maybe just metal fatigue after millions and millions of rotations. The exact trigger doesn't matter as much as what happens next. By 8:13 p.m., when the train passes through Salem, Ohio, that bearing was burning. Literally burning. Security footage would later show flames visible from the wheel assembly. But here's the critical detail. The detector at Salem read the bearing at 103 degrees Fahrenheit, above ambient temperature. Under Norfolk Southern's rules at the time, that wasn't hot enough to stop the train. Again, it was literally on fire. The detector needed to read 170 degrees above ambient for a warm warning. It needed 200 degrees for a critical alarm that would force an immediate stop. It was 20 miles from East Palestine, the last minute. At 8:54 p.m., train 32N approached the detector at milepost 49.81, just outside East Palestine. The infrared beam hit car 23's bearing, and the computer did its calculations. 253 degrees over ambient. The automatic voice crackled over the radio. Norfolk Southern detector milepost 49.81, critical car bearing defect. Engineer Christopher Stevens had seconds to process this. After nearly 50 miles of normal operations, his train was suddenly coming apart. He pulled the emergency brake, dumping all the air from the brake lines in a last-ditch effort to stop 18,000 tons of momentum. But at 47 miles per hour, even with emergency braking, a train that long needs over a mile to stop. It's 18,000 tons. The surveillance footage from East Palestine's industrial park tells the story in silent horror. The bearing glows white hot, then orange, then suddenly it isn't there at all. The wheel assembly drops, steel hits steel at 40 miles per hour. The car lifts, twists, and pulls its neighbors with it. In the language of accident investigation, this is called a pile-up derailment. Cars literally accordion into each other. 38 cars left the rails. 11 of them carried hazardous materials. The manifest is not a pleasant read. 5 tanks of vinyl chloride, the stuff they make PVC pipe from, which becomes hydrogen chloride and phosgene when it burns. Not good. tanks of butyl acrylate and ethyl hexyl acrylate, industrial chemicals that attack your nervous system. Also, not good. Ethylene glycomonobutyl ether, a solvent that goes straight through your skin. Really not good. Isobutylene, compressed, flammable, just waiting for a spark. Also not good. And sparks were everywhere. The first tank car punctured at 8:55 p.m. The fire started seconds later. The evacuation. East Palestine's fire chief, Keith Drabick, got the call at 8:56. A train was derailed and on fire. In a big city, this call would route to a hazmat team with specialized training, moon suits, and monitoring equipment. East Palestine had a volunteer fire department and some mutual aid agreements. Not quite the same thing, is it? The first problem was figuring out what was burning. The train's consist, the detailed manifesto of what's in each car, should be immediately available through a system called AskRail. But when responders tried to access it, they found gaps. The digital system showed car positions that didn't match the jumbled reality on the ground. By 10 p.m. the decision was made. Evacuate everyone within a mile. In February, in rural Ohio, that meant knocking on doors. Many of them farms, some of them isolated homes where people might not answer to strangers at night. The Red Cross opened a shelter at East Palestine High School just outside of the evacuation zone. Families arrived with pets, children in their pajamas. Meanwhile, back at the derailment, something worse was developing. The 5 tanks of vinyl chloride weren't just sitting there, they were heating up. The chemistry of catastrophe. Let me explain vinyl chloride. Under control, it's just another feedstock for plastics, but add heat and pressure and it transforms into something monstrous. Vinyl chloride wants to polymerize. That means its molecules want to link together into long chains. Usually manufacturers add stabilizers to prevent this, but heat breaks down stabilizers, and once polymerization starts, it generates its own heat, which speeds up the reaction, which generates more heat. Chemists, and probably you, call this a runaway reaction. The tank becomes a pressure cooker with no release valve. Eventually, the metal fails catastrophically, what emergency responders call a BLEV. Boiling, liquid, expanding vapor explosion. Imagine a bomb that throws shrapnel the size of car doors a quarter mile in every direction. By February 4th, the tank's pressure relief devices were venting, steel valves designed to release gas before the tank's rupture. But that just meant vinyl chloride vapor was now spreading invisibly through the area. The evacuation zone expanded to a 1 by 2 mile rectangle stretching into Pennsylvania. Norfolk Southern brought in contractors from Specialized Professional Services and PGI International, firms that handle the hazmat incidents and nobody else will touch. They installed temperature sensors on the tanks. The readings weren't good, 138 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. Or were they? This is where the story takes a critical turn, because the temperatures weren't consistently climbing. By February 5th, some readings showed the tanks were actually cooling. The shipper, Oxy Vinyls, sent their own experts who examined the tanks and came to a startling conclusion. The vinyl chloride was stable. Polymerization was not occurring, but that message got lost in the fog of crisis management. The decision. The meeting that would determine East Palestine's fate happened in a conference room at Norfolk Southern's Incident Command. Present were railroad officials, contractors, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine's office, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's team, and local emergency management. Notably absent, Oxy Vinyls experts who had actually examined the tanks. The contractors presented their assessment. The tanks could fail catastrophically at any moment. They recommended a vent and burn, deliberately puncturing the tanks and igniting the contents in a controlled manner. Let's be clear about what this meant. They were proposing to intentionally release and burn 115,000 gallons of vinyl chloride. The combustion would create a toxic cloud of hydrogen chloride and phosgene. Yes, that same phosgene used as a chemical weapon in World War I. The weather forecast showed winds would push the plumes southeast, away from populated areas, at least in theory. Governor DeWine was told that without the burn, they faced catastrophic tank failure that could throw shrapnel up to a mile. The evacuation zone was only 1 by 2 miles. The math was simple: controlled burn or potential mass casualties. At 3:30 p.m. the decision was final: the burn would proceed. But here's what investigators would later discover. The temperature data used to justify the burn was cherry-picked. While some readings showed 138 degrees, others from the same time showed 126 degrees and falling. The tank's pressure relief valves had been working correctly, bleeding off excess pressure. Most damning, Oxyvinyls had sent an email at 1:07 p.m. stating their experts found no evidence of polymerization. This email was forwarded within the contractor team but never reached the incident commander making the final decision. At 4:37 p.m. on February 6th, shaped charges detonated on 5 tank cars. The video went viral within hours. A black column rising thousands of feet, its top spreading into an anvil like some apocalyptic thundercloud. Every news network led with it. Social media exploded with comparisons to Chernobyl, to chemical warfare, to the end of times. Hydrogen chloride combined with moisture in the air to form hydrochloric acid droplets. Phosgene, heavier than air, hugged tight to the ground. Particulate matter, basically soot laden with chemicals, drifted on the wind. The EPA deployed everything they had: air monitoring stations, soil samples, water testing at dozens of sites. They created something called a deposition map, essentially tracking where the plume's contents fell to Earth. The immediate impact on nature was undeniable. Sulphur Run, the creek running through East Palestine, was poisoned. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources would eventually count 43,785 dead aquatic animals, mostly minnows, but the numbers included everything from crayfish to channel catfish. The kill zone stretched 5 miles downstream. Residents reported the obvious: dead chickens in yards, pets acting strangely, a chemically taste in their mouths. But also other things: headaches that wouldn't quit, rashes with no explanation, and exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. The EPA's air monitors told a different story, or at least a more complex one. Many readings showed chemical levels below action thresholds. Safe, according to federal standards. But those standards were written for industrial workers, not children. On February 8th at 5:28 p.m., officials lifted the evacuation order. Residents could return home. Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw would later say the community was safe. The EPA agreed. The investigation. The National Transportation Safety Board arrived within hours of the derailment, but their full investigation would take 17 months. What they found was a cascade of preventable failures. Investigators found evidence of a phenomenon called brinneling, tiny indentations where the rollers had hammered into the race during some previous impact. Maybe a hard coupling during switching, maybe a rough spot in the track. These indentations created stress points where cracks could start. Once the cracks began, heat built up from the friction. Heat broke down the grease. Without lubrication, metal ground against metal, more heat, more wear. The bearing cage, the structure holding the rollers in place, disintegrated. But the bearing failure was just the immediate cause. The NTSB identified the true culprit, the detection system that should have caught it. So remember those temperature thresholds: 170 degrees for a warm alarm, 200 for a critical. The NTSB found that these weren't based on science, they were based on reducing false positives. Railroad companies didn't want trains stopping for bearings that were hot but stable. Bad for business, allegedly. The investigators ran models. If the critical alarm threshold had been set at 170 degrees instead of 200, the crew would have had warnings 13 miles earlier. Enough time to stop safely. Even more frustrating, there were no federal standards for detector spacing or alarm thresholds. Each railroad set its own. Some had detectors every 10 miles, others every 25. Some set critical alarms at 170. Norfolk Southern chose 200. The NTSB's investigation into the vent and burn decision was equally as damning. They found polymerization was not occurring in the vinyl chloride tanks, the temperature readings were stabilizing, not rising, the pressure relief devices were functioning correctly, and the burn was not necessary to prevent tank rupture. The aftermath. The legal machinery ground into motion with unusual speed. By May 2024, Norfolk Southern agreed to a consent decree with the Department of Justice and EPA worth over $310 million. This included $15 million in civil penalties, $235 million for past and future cleanup costs, $25 million for a 20-year health monitoring program, $30 million for water monitoring and treatment, and $6 million for a regional emergency response fund. The class action settlement added another $600 million, though its distribution became contentious. Some residents felt pressured to accept quick payments that might preclude future claims. Others worried about property values that might never recover. The village of East Palestine itself negotiated a separate $22 million settlement in January 2025. More changes came in waves. Immediate, Norfolk Southern lowered its critical bearing temperature threshold to 170 degrees, the level that would have prevented this derailment. Regulatory, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration rushed through its real-time train consist rule. Say that 3 times fast, Jesus. First responders would now get immediate digital access to exactly what chemicals were on any train. And pending, the NTSB recommended federal standards for detector spacing and thresholds. As of August 2025, the Federal Railroad Administration is still reviewing these recommendations. The technology exists to prevent this. Acoustic bearing detectors can hear bearings failing before they get hot. Thermal portals can scan entire trains with military-grade infrared. Predictive algorithms can identify failure patterns days in advance. But technology costs money, and until February 3, 2023, the cost-benefit analysis didn't support widespread deployment. Bad for business. Lessons written in smoke. Today, East Palestine looks normal. The tracks are repaired, trains run through at the same frequency, about 50 a day. The creeks run clear, though many residents won't let their kids play in them. The EPA monitoring stations have mostly been removed. The failure that night wasn't just mechanical, it was systematic. A bearing that should have been caught, thresholds set for efficiency over safety, a crisis decision made without complete information. A controlled burn that investigators say never needed to happen. The bearing that failed on Car 23 was manufactured in 2002. It ran for 21 years and roughly 2 million miles before it catastrophically failed. In those same 21 years, approximately 1,000 other bearings failed on American railroads, most of them caught in time. East Palestine's bearing wasn't special, it was inevitable. There are over 140,000 miles of freight rail in America. These tracks run through 15,000 communities, many carrying the same chemicals that burned in East Palestine. They're inspected by the same types of detector, operating under the same patchwork of standards. The question isn't whether another bearing will fail. Bearings always eventually fail. The question is whether we'll detect it in time. Whether the next crew will get 13 extra miles of warning. The fix isn't a single gadget or regulation. It's time. Time to detect, time to stop, time to decide with complete information. Time to listen to experts before a black plume writes the story for you.